Ancient Faith Radio, your Orthodox Internet radio connection.
Welcome to Live with the Louhs with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Lowe, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Live with the Louhs. My name is Father Nicholas Lowe, and it's such a pleasure to have you joining us this evening. I am the parish priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church, located right here in Jacksonville, Florida. And it's such a pleasure to have you here with us this evening. You know, if you're new to Live with the Louhs, one of the things that you should know is that our show aims to really give you some pragmatic ways to apply your faith. In fact, we believe so heartedly in what we call practical Christianity that merges both faith and psychology together to give you some practical steps that help you apply your faith in your everyday life. Our show airs every single Tuesday evening at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. You know, before we dive into tonight's really kind of cool and exciting topic, I do want to encourage you, as I do every single week, to stay connected to us on our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also on YouTube, all under the headings of The Louhs. So all you have to do is simply search Louhs on those social media platforms, and you'll have access to us. And if you're looking for some inspirational sermons that kind of mirror a lot of what we talk about on our show, definitely you'll find all of them on our YouTube channel. Again, that's The Louhs. And finally, several years ago, Roxanne and I began sending out daily inspirational messages just to give people encouragement. I don't know about all of you, but sometimes when you watch the news or we just kind of see what's going on in the world, and maybe even sometimes just in our own walk of faith, what we're dealing with, sometimes we just need some encouragement, just some little word of wisdom. And so we send these out every single morning through your email inbox. So if you're interested in receiving them, all you have to do is go to our website at thelouhs.com. Again, that's Louhs.com. Click on the subscribe button, and all you have to do is simply put in your email address. And every single morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, you'll receive one of our daily messages. And if you're already receiving them, do us a favor. Share them with your friends and family and encourage them as well to also receive those messages on their own. As we do every single week, we do encourage you to call and join the conversation. There's a number of ways that you can do that this evening, one of which is by calling us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question during the live broadcast of our show by emailing us at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. We are broadcasting our show on our social media Facebook page. So if you're on Facebook, you want to go to the Louhs and leave a comment, definitely do so, as well as on Ancient Faith's Facebook page. They're also being broadcast there. So definitely leave us a comment if you're interested, and please feel free to join the conversation. So tonight we want to do something a little bit different. I want to take you guys all on a little bit of a journey, because I think for so many of us, we can get so caught up in our own life, our own world, what's kind of going on in our own little atmosphere, if you will. And oftentimes we kind of just live in that own little world. But today I want to take you to a country that Roxanne and I visited several years ago that we absolutely fell in love with, called Lithuania. And not only do I want to talk to you about it, but I brought a couple of friends of mine to be on the show tonight to talk about a pilgrimage they did to Lithuania and speak about how extraordinary of a country that is. Not only about how Lithuania is, but also I want to expand your horizons a little bit, friends, and to kind of encourage you to see how God's grace is working all over the world and how he's touching people's lives, and how every country is made up of extraordinary people who have the breath of God inside of them, and where Christianity is alive, but also to know their story. So the people that I want to introduce you to tonight are really no strangers to ancient faith at all. Their names are Father Andrew Damick. He's the Chief Content Officer of Ancient Faith Ministries. He's the former pastor of St. Paul's Antiochian Orthodox Church in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, and the author of a number of different articles and books, the author of Arise, O God, Orthodoxy and Heterodoxy, an outstanding, by the way, book, and Bearing God and an Introduction to God. He is also the co-host of The Lord of the Spirits, a very popular podcast here at Ancient Faith. And then also the Europicus with Michael Landsman and Eamon Sewell with Richard Rohlin, who's also going to be on our show tonight. And he also is the host of Orthodoxy and Heterodoxy, Orthodox Engagement, and Roads from Emmaus. You can see just how much material he produces here on Ancient Faith. And also Richard Rohlin, who's a software developer and an Orthodox Christian living in Texas with his wife and children. He speaks and publishes on Germanic poetry, the Inklings, and the sacramental imagination. To both of you, Father Andrew, and as well as to Richard, welcome to Live with the Louhs. It's an honor to have you on our show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Thank you very much, Father. It's good to be here.
So, Father Andrew, let's just begin by just explaining, because I think a lot of people may not know, they've heard of Lithuania, but may not know where Lithuania is. So let's just talk from the very beginning. Where exactly is Lithuania?
Yeah. So, okay, I'm assuming most of your listeners are probably in the United States. So if you can kind of bring your mind on up to Newfoundland on the eastern coast of Canada, and then just go straight east across the Atlantic Ocean, you'll hit the United Kingdom. There's Scotland and England over there. Keep going east, and you'll pass over Norway and Denmark and Sweden, and then across a little sea called the Baltic Sea, and bam, you are in Lithuania. So it's northeastern Europe. It's just a couple of hops away from Russia, and it's not too far from Ukraine. It's in that area.
Before we kind of go any further, Father Andrew, I think it'd be great, maybe for you as well as Richard. I think it'd be great to hear this. Knowing where Lithuania is located at, just very, very close to Russia. Obviously, an area that's we hear a lot about in the news today, and definitely a lot of concern that's going on around the world. Could you speak a little bit about, I know that we're going to get to the pilgrimage, but maybe just expound a little bit on your experience there, especially and really specifically towards what they're going through with what's going on just a few miles away in the Ukraine.
Yeah, so Lithuania is near Russia. It actually does share a very short border with Russia, but on its western border, there's a little piece of Russia that's kind of broken off on the Baltic Sea called Kaliningrad Oblast. So Lithuania does share a border with Russia. It's not very much of one. It's surrounded by Belarus on the east and southeast, and then also Poland to the southwest, and then Latvia is to the north. So it's about 1,000 miles or so from where most of the military action is happening. While we were there, we did not feel unsafe in any way. There was no kind of military mobilization going on while we were there. There was, however, a very, very great show, especially in the cities, of solidarity with Ukraine. There were a lot of Ukrainian flags hanging there. And I would say that it's very different the way that they feel about it from the way that Americans, we have a lot of opinions over here in the United States about this question. For us, it's mostly kind of a matter of opinions about, where our money is going and all that kind of stuff, and how we feel about Ukraine as a country. Lithuania, on the other hand, has a long and very complicated history with Russia itself. There were 120 years of life under the Russian Empire, in which the Russian Empire, in many ways, tried to kind of wipe out their culture and their language. And then, of course, 50 years under Soviet Russia in the later part of the 20th century. And so for Lithuanians, they very much see it as a struggle against an invader that they know. We didn't encounter any kind of anti-Russian racism while we were there, but certainly Lithuanians are not big fans of the Russian government by any means. There's a significant Russian minority that lives in Lithuania. About 5% of the population is Russian. And so Russians are their neighbors. They go to church with them. They work with them. They're part of the fabric of life there. So there's a difference between the Russian that they live with and work with, and then, the Russian government.
If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Father Andrew Stephen Damick. He's the Chief Content Officer of Ancient Faith Ministries, along with Richard Rohlin. They just put together really episode 1 of an extraordinary podcast that you can find right here at Ancient Faith called The Wolf, Lithuania Before the Cross. And we're talking about really this amazing country of Lithuania, and not only just its extraordinary history, but also just the beauty of its culture, its faith, and how it meant so much to them on their pilgrimage. And so, Richard, is your family from Lithuania? I know. I also like to ask that to you,
No.
Father. Okay, so really, what inspired you to be part of the pilgrimage as well? Was it just an eagerness to learn more about Lithuania?
I mean, this is a complicated question
Mm-hmm.
because I've been very interested, let's say, imaginatively, and I've been very interested and kind of in love with that whole sort of part of the world between the Baltic and the Black Sea for
Mm.
many years, even before I
Mm-hmm.
became an Orthodox Christian. And so when the opportunity came to go and to help Father Andrew with the documentary, I just jumped at it. The other thing there though is that there is I talk about this in the very first episode, but there's a very significant icon there in the city of Vilnius, which is the capital of Lithuania. And this icon is called Our Lady of the Gate of the Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Mm-hmm.
wonder-working icon of the Theotokos. It's very large, actually. I really was almost startling how large it is. But it's there in the city of Vilnius, and it has a kind of a history and a connection with, among others, Saint Seraphim of Sarov.
Mm.
And this is an icon that I've had a great devotion to for a long time. So for me, a big part of the pilgrimage was just going to see her.
Mm.
So there were a few different things that went into it. But one of the I don't think I've told this story at all yet. I'm sure this will be in the documentary as it
Mm-hmm.
unfolds. But there were a couple of people there that I just became really fast friends with, and I've continued to chat with. And there was one priest there that we spent some time with, Father Vitalis, and I looked at him, and maybe on our last night, our last night there, we all had dinner together there at a farmhouse.
Mm-hmm.
It was our last night hanging out with him and his family, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I said, it's an amazing thing that you can come halfway across the world and find somebody with the same spirit.
Mm.
And I
Isn't
really
that
felt that
beautiful?
way, and
Mm-hmm.
it was it was a really remarkable experience, not just because of the land or the history, although I've always been interested in those things, but to come and find my brothers and sisters in the faith, and to meet with them.
That's so beautiful. And Father Andrew, you have some roots, some Lithuanian roots, correct?
Yeah, that's right. My great-grandparents were both from Lithuania, and they immigrated in the late 19th century, early 20th century, when about a fifth of the population of Lithuania was emptying out, basically because they couldn't make a living. And so many, many people left and came to the U.S. A group came to Scotland, all over the world, really.
Where are some of the pockets of Lithuanians? Is there areas of the country, of our country here in the U.S., that where you have large populations of Lithuanians?
The largest number is in Chicago. They even have a Lithuanian cultural museum there in Chicago. There are multiple Lithuanian Catholic churches there. Although the highest concentration of Lithuanian blood is actually here in Pennsylvania, in a little town called New Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, not to be confused with the other Philadelphia. There's not much to it. It's near Frackville. So if we've got any Eastern PA people,
I didn't even know there was a New Philadelphia. That's
there
pretty
is,
amazing.
yes, right. So in fact, the longest running ethnic festival in the United States is the Lithuanian festival that is up there near New Philadelphia and
Oh,
Frackville.
wow.
That's
Wow,
right.
that's
right. I've been a few times
extraordinary.
myself. Yeah.
So, Father Andrew, just share with our listeners your story. I mean, because not only are you so well, you're just managing so many different things, not only with ancient faith, but also as your responsibility as a priest. But kind of, maybe just share with a very brief, introduction about, because I don't know if all of our listeners may know who you are, and I'd love for them to get to know who you are. And so, just not only you have some Lithuanian roots, but also just a little bit about who you are and your history in the Orthodox Church.
Yeah. So I've been an Orthodox Christian for just shy of 25 years now. I was raised as the son of evangelical Protestant missionaries. So despite my Lithuanian DNA, I was not raised Catholic the way that most Lithuanians are. I was raised as an evangelical Protestant. And I discovered the Orthodox Church when I was in college in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I joined a really beautiful, amazing Antiochian Orthodox church that's there in Raleigh named All Saints. So if you've got any All Saintsers listening, I love you. I'm happy you're tuning in. And then I met my wife in 2002, and we got married the next year. And then the year after that, we went to seminary at St. Tikhon's Seminary here in Pennsylvania. And after I graduated in 2007, I was assigned for 2 years as the assistant pastor at St. George Cathedral in Charleston, West Virginia. And then I was assigned as the pastor to St. Paul's here in Emmaus, Pennsylvania. And for the last 2.5 years, I've been working full-time for Ancient Faith Ministries. So talking into microphones and writing and so forth is basically what I do for a living. But I do still serve as a priest at our local parish. I serve, I sing, I teach, but I don't have to go to parish council meetings. So.
Oh, wow. Wow, I'm sure there's a lot of priests that are listening going, wow, that seems like a very nice experience.
It's true. But, we've got 4 kids, and we love living here in Eastern PA.
So then, kind of just building on that, Father Andrew, tell us a little bit why then you did want to go to Lithuania. It seems, obviously, you have some lineage there, but tell us what brought this about. What was there a moment, and then how did you plan this? I mean, tell us all about that.
So, as I mentioned, my great-grandparents were from there. My great-grandmother, whose name was Olga, she was from the city of Kaunas, which is the second city of Lithuania, and she went back to Kaunas in 1936, and then that was the last time that anyone in my family went to Lithuania. So it's been almost 100 years since anyone went. I am certain that I have third and probably fourth cousins there. I wasn't able to make connection with them while I was there, although I'm still trying. But my great-grandparents, when they came to the U.S., they wanted to be American, and that was that. So they would speak Lithuanian to each other in the home, but they didn't teach it to my grandfather, their son. So he came away with basically zero Lithuanian background. And our last name was traditionally Damick. That was changed in short order. And so by the time I was born, a few generations after the immigration, any sense of Lithuanian identity was just completely erased. Not even any food, like nothing like that. And so being what they call a third culture kid, and so since I know you guys swim in the world of psychology, you know what that is. Being a third culture kid myself, because I was born to a Navy family that became a missionary family, that question of who am I and where exactly I'm from and where are my roots kind of plagues third culture kids our whole lives. There's no way to get away from it. And so I had the sense that there was something broken, and I wanted to go see if there was some way to mend it, if I possibly could. And for years I had thought about Lithuania, but it was mostly just kind of a name. And then I started actually doing some research. Okay, what exactly is this place about? Who are these people? What's their language? What's their culture? And then, of course, eventually, after I became an Orthodox Christian, I asked the question, well, does Orthodoxy have any presence there in Lithuania? What's that all about? Do they have their own saints? What's that history? And so I became more and more fascinated by it. And I'll be honest, when the conversation began happening about me coming on as a full-time content creator for Ancient Faith Ministries, the thing that I pitched to John and Tanya Maddox was, I want to go to Lithuania and do a documentary pilgrimage because no one else is doing anything like this. And that's the kind of thing you could get from someone who works for you full-time. And John said, I don't know how we're going to make this happen, but somehow we have to. And so then finally, about 5 years after that conversation, we were on a plane.
Oh, that's amazing. You're listening to Live with the Louhs. We are speaking with Father Andrew Damick. He's the Chief Content Officer of Ancient Faith Ministries, as well as Richard Rohlin. We're speaking about a brand new documentary that they just put out. It's an extraordinary podcast called The Wolf, Lithuania Before the Cross. I definitely encourage you to check this out. Father Andrew, if you wouldn't mind, just can you share with our listeners where they could find that?
Yeah, so The Wolf and the Cross, that's the name of the overall series. Lithuania Before the Cross is the first episode. You can find it on the AFR app. You can find it on podcasts. You can go to ancientfaith.com. It's just kind of everywhere. So just look up The Wolf and the Cross and you can find us.
Excellent. And you can actually call in right now and speak with Father Andrew and Richard by calling us at 1-855-237-2346. 1-855-237-2346. As I mentioned at the top of the show, you definitely can email us as well during the live broadcast of our show by emailing us at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. Richard, I'd love to hear, what was your experience? I know you kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier, but, what did you experience while you were there, and where did you both go?
Well, we went over almost the entire country. Lithuania is not a very large country territorially, although that's not always been the case, as you'll discover if you listen to our documentary. I'm a proud Texan, so I like to measure things in like standard Texas units. And so Lithuania is about the size of North Texas, the region of Texas that I live in. You can get across the country in about 4 hours by train, maybe a little bit less by car. So we started out in the city of Vilnius, which is the capital of city of Lithuania, and that was our, let's say, base of operations. We did spend a few nights, or well, I guess one night out out. Father Andrew, help me out here. I just completely spaced out. Klaipėda, thank you.
Yes.
I've been looking at the stuff too much the last couple of days and just completely blanked. Yeah, we spent one night out on the Baltic coast at Klaipėda, really beautiful town. And but other than that, we spent every night in Vilnius, and we kind of made excursions out from there. And as far as what I experienced, I mean, it's difficult to summarize that, right? But a couple of things really stand out. I've already talked about just the beautiful, warm reception and hospitality that we received from the Orthodox Christians who hosted us and kind of looked after us and took care of us and took us around and made sure that we had translators everywhere we went and made sure that we had, meals and all these different things. But also, one of the things that really struck me as a historian, as a student of language and history, was the way that Lithuania becomes a nexus. And this is this stuff that, the parts of the documentary I'm working on are really focused on this, the way that it's really this nexus for all of these really important historical events which happened in European history, not just Eastern European history, but in European history as a whole. There's very much a sense in which Lithuania is this crossroads between the East and West. And so you start to dig in the history, and we spent quite a bit of time at the Trakai Castle. One day when we were there, Trakai is one of the other historical capitals of Lithuania, and it has, if you Google Lithuania and you just try to look for pictures, Trakai Castle is one of the ones that almost always comes up, and it's out there on this lake in the city of Trakai, a really beautiful lake. I'll just say as an aside, there are lots of natural bodies of water in Lithuania, lakes, streams, rivers, etc. They were all really beautiful, all very clean. There's not a lot of pollution. It's not a very densely populated country, and so one of the things I really appreciated is that everyone in Lithuania likes to swim. So sometimes we just say, hey, we've been walking around for a bit. Let's jump in the lake for a minute, and that was cool. But so Trakai Castle is on this. There are a couple of islands in the middle of the lake there, and Trakai Castle is situated on one of those islands. And the castle was built basically to withstand the siege of the Teutonic Knights. And so there's a lot of interesting history around there. And so you've got the Teutonic Knights there. You have obviously a pretty important thing for the history of the Orthodox Church, especially if you're in the kind of the tradition that I'm in, is the Union of Brest-Litovsk, the beginning of the whole Uniate movement. All that stuff happened in Lithuania, right? So it's this really important location where over the course of just a few hundred years, I mean, let's say the last 700, there are borders move and shift, and sometimes it's a little dizzying to even keep track of who was in charge of what when, because you've got a king of Lithuania or a Grand Duke of Lithuania. He has a Lithuanian name, but he also has a Polish name, and the different sources use one name or the other, and you might be several pages into reading before you realize, wait, we're actually talking about the same person. And so I was just deeply impressed by when we were out at Klaipėda, one of the places that we went to there was this bit of land called the Curonian Spit, which is it's actually a formation of what are called parabolic dunes. These are large sand dunes. They're called parabolic because occasionally they get up and walk around and like eat a village or something. In fact, if I recall, some of the dunes are actually named after villages that they've swallowed in the past. But anyway, so out there on the Curonian Spit, there's a bunch of these really beautiful little villages. I mean, one of the most beautiful, idyllic places that I can ever remember being in my life. And there's a hotel there where every important philosopher and thinker and writer of the 18th, 19th, 20th century Europe stayed at that hotel. Freud stayed there, Sartre stayed there, and we went to Thomas Mann's house while we were out there, where he wrote. People who don't know, Thomas Mann is a pretty important early 20th century German novelist, and actually wrote a really great kind of a novel about the life of Joseph. But we went to the house where he wrote that novel, and it's one of my favorites. And so it was really surreal just being there in that building. So just the way that even when we were driving out that way, we were taking this very small road, winding road through a pine forest. And our guide told me, he said, well, this is actually the road that Napoleon took when he was marching to Moscow. And it used to be, a much more important road, but then it's not that big of a deal anymore. So it's kind of dwindled, but this used to be the main road east.
I think it's so important. I think, Rich, what I love hearing you say, and I think I'm sure our listeners hear that through your voice, is just the opportunity to experience another culture, another way of living, and another way of experiencing life. And I think, kind of harping on what we were sharing at the top of the show is, for our listeners, I think it's so important, because we can get so caught up in our own life and our own world, and sometimes just allowing ourselves to kind of break down those imaginary walls, if you will, that separate us, and just recognizing that the same spirit that exists within us exists across the world, and, having that experience with the people and knowing that everyone, yearns to have much of the same desires, that they desire to be loved, to be appreciated, to be welcomed, to experience hospitality, all these things that, I think so often we can kind of just, forget a little bit. And, I think, Father Andrew, I'd love to, for you to share with our listeners, why is it so important to take a pilgrimage? I mean, why do you think that's so important for our listeners to have that opportunity and to do just that?
Yeah, I think pilgrimage is a really important part of Christian life, actually. And even if someone maybe can't afford to take a long trip, they can still make a pilgrimage, maybe a local pilgrimage. Even when you get up in the morning and you walk over to your icon corner, you're going somewhere to go pray. And that's the basic movement. It's to step outside of what you're doing, where you live normally, and then go somewhere else specifically to make a prayer. The Greek word for pilgrimage is proskinema, which refers to veneration. And so you go to venerate, right? The English word pilgrimage comes from the Latin peregrinatio, which means to wander around. So it has that sense of leaving. You have to go somewhere, and you're not where you're used to be. You have to step outside of your comfort zone. Some pilgrimages are very quiet and meditative and contemplative. Others, like the one we took in Lithuania, was exhausting. We learned an average of 10 miles each day. 10 miles a day.
Wow. That's a lot of steps.
Yeah. Richard handled it much better than I did because,
for context, 10 miles a day is the historical travel speed of a Roman legion.
There you go. Right.
Wow.
Wow. So yeah, I think pilgrimage is, it requires us to set ourselves aside and to go, and it's a profoundly humble act if you try to put yourself into it at all. And especially if you get the opportunity to make a pilgrimage to another country, it's enveloping. You're just completely somewhere else, So even though we were surrounded by people who spoke English, that wasn't the language we heard most of the time. Now, as soon as we opened our mouths, they started talking English to us. But, different way of thinking, different way of eating, different way of, everything. It was really profoundly beautiful.
I love that.
If I could add something to that.
Sure, absolutely, Richard.
To take a pilgrimage is a commitment to being a human being, by which I mean it's a commitment to being a human being with a body. It's so easy in our country today, especially in our culture, and especially for many of us who come from less embodied traditions before we came into the Orthodox Church, to just let your faith be something that's in your head, right? And so one of the great virtues of a pilgrimage, even if it's just making it as far as your icon corner, there are certainly days where that seems like all I can do. But but the act of, I mean, even going to church on Sunday morning is a kind of pilgrimage. Father Alexander Schmemann talks about this in For the Life of the World, right? This idea that when you go to church, right, you're kind of just the act of getting out the door and going to church. That is a kind of prayer, right? It's an embodied prayer. And when we take a pilgrimage, it's a commitment to being a person who has a body, getting outside of your head, not allowing your faith to become this thing that's sort of can fester, right? Actually, if it's just intellectual and it's just in your mind and you're kind of sitting there thinking all day, or you're, what I find is if I try to live just inside my head, then I start to think about all the imaginary enemies that I drum up, and these people on the internet, and these people on the other side of the world, and whatever else. But so to kind of set all that aside, get up and go somewhere, and go to a holy place, and go venerate the saints, or go see a holy icon, or just make it to your church for liturgy. That is a profoundly human act.
And I think I think ultimately what it does is it also helps us to just strengthen our own walk of faith. I mean, so ultimately we're coming back, but to be able to bring that experience, not only does it become a moment in our life, but it becomes another layer that we add to kind of that enhances our own spiritual faith. And so we definitely encourage that, and it's something that I'm sure our listeners, if you're able to, to take that, even taking a little pilgrimage every day, as Father Andrew and Richard were speaking about, just take today we're celebrating the feast of Saint Anthony, and one of the things I was speaking about this morning with our parishioners was how much he loved silence, and how one of the pilgrimages that we can do every day is just simply take time to separate ourselves, to go on a journey of just total silence, and allow it to just kind of reflect, to just, without even trying to think of anything else, even in our prayer, not even communicating in our prayer to God, but simply just listening to what he's trying to communicate to us. I think that it offers so many ways for us to just grow in our faith. So if you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Father Andrew and Richard on a brand new documentary that's here on Ancient Faith called The Wolf and the Cross. And the first episode is called Lithuania Before the Cross. And I definitely encourage you all to listen to it. It's really extraordinary and fascinating. And we'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to speak with Father Andrew or Richard, you can call us at 1-855-237-2346. Again, that's 1-855-237-2346. And you can also email us a question, ask@ancientfaith.com, as well as leave any comments on our Facebook page. The Louhs Facebook page, as well as Ancient Faith's Facebook page, is we're broadcasting the show also there as well. And so we had an audio question that came in from Stefan. So I'd like for Father Andrew, I'd like for you to hear his comment and his question to you.
Hello, I'd love to know more about the Orthodox Church in Lithuania. We have a group, I think, from Australia, and they had a church called the Three Martyrs of Vilna. And I think that has something to do with keeping the fast. But also, I'd love to know more about, if I could say, real Lithuanian Orthodox. Not that I have anything against Russian Orthodox. I wonder if there are people that are really, truly Lithuanian speaking as their first tongue, and what is their history of Orthodoxy? Are they all converts, or are there some people that have been Orthodox for generations? Thank you very much. My name is Stefan, and I'm in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. Thank you.
So, Father Andrew, I mean, let's kind of tackle this from two angles. One is, what is the history of Orthodox Christianity in Lithuania? And then finally, what is the current state of the Orthodox Church there? So let's start with the history.
Yeah, well, To that, I would just say, everybody listen to the podcast,
Right?
Because it's gonna be big because there's a lot to say.
Right.
But the short version is that there were very early missions right around 1,000 years ago, and they didn't really amount to much in terms of creating a permanent Christian community. But then you start to get a permanent Orthodox Christian presence about a little less than 700 years ago. And largely because some of the Grand Dukes begin to marry princesses who are Ruthenian, what we would now think of as Belarusians or Ukrainians. Although at the time, those weren't really distinctions that were being held, at that period. But so they were Orthodox. So they're marrying Orthodox women who came and they brought their priest with them. And those priests began to baptize members of the Lithuanian court. And so it was actually within those first couple generations, you actually get martyrs because the Lithuanian court flips between Catholic and pagan and once or twice Orthodox, and a lot of flipping back and forth, largely for political reasons. And so there's a presence of Orthodoxy in Lithuania, especially as the Grand Duchy of Lithuania begins to expand much beyond the borders of present-day Lithuania. So if you think about the Baltic Sea, that's what was essentially just the northern part of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. It extended all the way from the Baltic Sea down to the Black Sea and included most of modern-day Ukraine, pretty much all of Belarus, parts of Poland, parts of Western Russia. And so there was actually a period where the Grand Dukes were pagans, but most of their people were Orthodox. And then you get a period where the Grand Dukes are Catholics, and still most of the people are Orthodox, living, south and east of them. And it kind of goes back and forth for a while. And eventually Poland for about 400 years. And during that period, there's still a significant Orthodox population, largely in what is now Belarus and Ukraine. But like I said, those are part of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And then at the end of the 18th century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is split up basically between the empires of Russia and Prussia and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And those countries, Lithuania and Poland, cease to exist as independent sovereign states. And not too long after that, if you think again about Lithuania proper, now part of the Russian Empire, there was a point where there was almost no Orthodox churches actually open in Lithuania proper. There was one women's monastery, and in the Vilnius area. And then, so for a long time, there was pretty much no presence of Orthodoxy in Lithuania. And then there was a big return of, we commonly call them Uniats, Eastern Catholics, who, as Richard mentioned, the Union of Brest creates the Unia there in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. There was a big return of a number of them in the 19th century, and that creates the modern Russian Orthodox diocese that exists in Lithuania to this day. And so that's the origin of that. And so there's, various Orthodox churches. So the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the Russian Orthodox Church, the Polish Autocephalous Orthodox Church, all have had parishes in Lithuania at various points in history. And so today, about 100,000 people or so that say on census forms that they're Orthodox, but only about 2,000 or 3,000 actually go to church on a regular basis. So it's a very small minority there. There's about 60 parishes in the whole country. To Stefan's question, there are indeed indigenous Lithuanian-speaking Orthodox Christians, although the question of what exactly is their first language is not super clear because only 4% of Lithuanians are monolingual. Almost everybody in Lithuania speaks at least two languages. Many of them speak English, especially the younger folks, and then many of the older ones, the 40s and above, speak Russian as their second language, and then often they'll have Polish and maybe some Ukrainian and some other stuff like that. The vast majority of Orthodox Christians in Lithuania are Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian. There's also significant Greek community there, especially in Vilnius. And there are a number of converts to Orthodox Christianity who were usually Lithuanian Catholics, because that's the largest religious group there in Lithuania.
Father Andrew, can I just circle back with this, so I can just understand? There are about 100,000 Orthodox Christians you were sharing earlier, and only about 2,000 to 3,000 actually go to church.
right?
Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah.
What do you attribute as such a drastic, difference in the actual amount of people that are that attribute themselves to being Orthodox, and yet only 2 to 3? Really,
Well, so most Orthodox Christians in Lithuania are of Slavic background, so Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, and that ratio is roughly what it is, especially in Russia. That's about the church attendance rate in much of Russia. So they're kind of behaving basically like their cousins, a couple of countries away, in terms of that. And then also, quite frankly, during the Soviet period, many of the Russians present in Lithuania were very heavily secularized. And so, interestingly, while about 100,000, describe themselves as Orthodox, there's also a significant number of Russian Catholics in Lithuania. And that's because these were people who converted to Christianity having grown up as atheists. And they converted to the majority kind of Christianity in Lithuania, which is Catholicism. So the ethnic, community of Slavs is rather bigger than the Orthodox community of Slavs. And like I said, there's a number of converts as well. And there are a couple of churches that are worshiping in Lithuanian. But still to this day, the vast majority of Orthodox churches in Lithuania are worshiping in Church Slavonic, which most Russians don't even understand.
So the Catholic, go ahead, Richard, please.
Oh, yes. If I could just add a little something to that. We will actually have some interviews with converts on the documentary. And one in particular, which I'm really excited about. I got to do that interview, and it was a really beautiful conversation. And I'm excited for everyone to hear that.
Can you tease us a little bit with it, just with what you heard that was just...
tell them about her.
Okay. Well, so I had this interview with this young woman, Joanna, in Holy Baptism, and she's led a very interesting life. She grew up a Roman Catholic, and then became a very secular person, became an atheist, and then started to get involved in Far Eastern spiritual practices, such that she eventually was actually living in Tibet on top of a mountain as a yogi, like a very high level yogi, and actually, experienced severe demonic torment as a result of the practices that she was involved in. And so she came back to Lithuania and was really just lost and in deep, deep spiritual pain. And she kind of at the end of her rope, she went into the Church of the Holy Spirit, at the Monastery of the Holy Spirit there, which is kind of the sort of de facto cathedral in Vilnius. It's not the de jure cathedral, but it's basically it's where the bishop is usually in residence. Really beautiful church, has this famous Baroque iconostas, which is painted this really bright green, which seems it seems very like iconic of that particular church, although it's actually a fairly recent thing. I think you'll hear that story on the documentary Why It's Green. But there in that church, they have the relics of the three holy martyrs of Vilnius. So this brings us back to the gentleman's question concerning the three martyrs of Vilnius. Does it have something to do with keeping the fast? Yes. In fact, if you want to know who are the three holy martyrs of Vilnius and why were they martyred, and why should you take the nativity fast a little more seriously next year, all that stuff you can get. It's kind of the climax of episode 1, so you can go listen to it right now. But she came in there, and the person who was the warden or whatever, the person watching the church that day, allowed her to come up and actually venerate the relics of the three holy martyrs. So they're the relics, which are incorrupt, are there in the middle of the nave. And as soon as she touched their feet, the demons left her, and she had peace and she had clarity, and that wasn't the end of her problems. She, the way she puts it, you'll hear this in the documentary, she experiences really significant spiritual warfare over the course of the next several months, ultimately culminating in her reception into the Orthodox Church. And so she's just one of the converts that we spoke with, but actually almost all of the priests that we spent with time with, especially the ones who were guiding us around and giving us a tour and translating for us and things like this, were also converts.
What do
And
you attribute that to, Richard? I mean, what are you,
well,
you know, when
so
you,
yeah, so it's a very interesting question, and it's something I asked every single one of them. I was my like Father Andrew. My background is evangelical, specifically Baptist. I grew up also as the son of evangelical missionaries and pastors, etc., and actually was a pastor myself for several years before I became Orthodox.
mm,
And so coming from an evangelical framework, it's easy to see, well, okay, Orthodoxy has, all this extra fullness that I
hmm
felt like I was lacking before, etc. But, if you're coming out of, Roman Catholicism, it's a little different. And so I was just really curious, like, why did you come over? And it turns out to be every single person that I talked to about this turns out to be basically the same reasons that I converted, or that most people who are converts that I've talked to
hmm
converted, is because there was something in the mystical and the liturgical life of the Orthodox faith that that they were missing, and they came and they found fullness. And the men that we who were guiding us around and are very dedicated to making that fullness accessible to the people of Lithuania.
Wow, that's extraordinary. I mean, as I'm listening to you, I want to just invite our listeners once again before our show. We've got about 13 minutes left of our show to call if you'd like to speak to Father Andrew as well as to Richard on this extraordinary documentary that you can find right here on Ancient Faith Radio. It's called Lithuania Before the Cross, and this first one is called The Wolf, Lithuania Before the Cross. I definitely would encourage you to check this out. The phone number you can call us is at 1-855-237-2346, 1-855-237-2346, or feel free to email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. I think, as I'm listening to both of you speak, I think it begs the question, what is your ultimate hope? And I'd like to hear from both of you on this is, what is your hope that as our listeners take the time, whether it be tonight or whenever they're listening to this podcast, to search and to listen to Lithuania Before the Cross, what is your ambition? What would you hope that they would leave that with? And so, let's start with you, Richard. What would you love to be the hope that they all leave with, in their hearts and also in their faith?
One of the really interesting things that I took away from this, and this is like a weird thing maybe to take away from a pilgrimage, was a deep conviction that holiness is possible anywhere.
Mm,
When you get there, it's very easy, especially for many people who are listening to this, may be converts, and they may be sort of thinking, oh, well, I can't be as Orthodox as I want to be, or I can't live the life of the church in the fullness that I would want to live it. But, if I was just over in the old country, if I was just, in whatever golden age, if I was just somewhere else or in a different time, but then you get over there and you start to understand the long and frankly, many points,
mm-hmm,
painful
mm-hmm,
path that the church has had to walk in, anywhere in the world, really. But there again, being at this nexus of
mm-hmm,
all these important historical movements and events and things like this. And yet, after all of that, to still be able to come into contact with Christ in the liturgy, to still be able to come into contact with the relics of the saints and with wonder-working icons and with good, holy Christian people who love their neighbor, who care about the country where God has planted them. And then you start to think, we could be holy in Dallas, Texas too.
mm-hmm,
Because in
mm-hmm.
many respects, we don't have nearly as many obstacles to the growth of the Orthodox faith over here in the United States. So I think that actually one of the big things that I hope people come away with from the documentary is pilgrimages. You're always going out so that you can come back in.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. You're going out and then you're returning.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that the pilgrimage will sort of take people out of themselves, out of the narrow frame their their everyday life, and we're going to be dealing a lot with history. So it's also to take you out of the narrow frame of your modern life, so that you can start to really come to glimpse the fullness of the Christian faith by seeing how it has grown and expressed itself and embodied itself in other times and places. But then you have to be able to take that back into your own life, back into your own family, back into your house, into your parish. And sometimes it's a little thing, like bringing home a custom from another place that's really beautiful. A great example of something like this that happened in the Orthodox Church was the greeting that I'm in the Orthodox Church in America, and churches of Slavic tradition here in the United States, we have a very frequent greeting, glory to Jesus Christ, glory forever, right? But that comes from Lithuania, right? And so there are other things too. One of the most beautiful customs or traditions in Lithuania that actually predates Christianity, but then was very quickly gathered up into it for obvious reasons, is the traditional craft of cross making. And so one of the most striking things was where you would go in the kind of like the countryside in Lithuania on these little roads, sometimes some very alarming roads. Father Andrew will know the roads of which I speak. And just out in the middle of nowhere, and there's nothing but pasture land and cows. And then you come to an intersection, and there's this large wooden crucifix, really beautiful, kind of like Baltic sun cross with a crucifix on it everywhere. And you see things like this everywhere you go out in the countryside. People have them in their yards. So this is one of the things that I want to do this year, is to build a cross. And we've been building a new garden in our on our property here in Texas, and so we're going to put a cross, kind of Lithuanian style, right in the midst of it. One other thing that I hope people come away with, I didn't get a chance to mention this last week when we were on Father Tom Soroka's show, but you do not understand, or at least I did not understand, really, the Orthodox teaching concerning our love and care for the departed until I visited a Lithuanian cemetery for the first time. Here in the United States, our cemeteries are mass-produced. They're basically, it's like, I don't want to sound irreverent, but it's a little like walking through Costco. It's just like row after row after row of graves, and they're all the same, and they're all forgotten, and they're all neglected. But if you go to a Lithuanian cemetery, there are gardens. Every single family plot is tended. People come every single day to water the plants and refresh the flowers and say a prayer. We spent quite a bit of time in a cemetery in Father Andrew's ancestral village, which is something you'll hear about on the documentary. But while we were there, I saw several families come and go, usually a mother or a grandmother and 2 or 3 children. They'd come, they'd refresh the flowers, they'd make the sign of the cross, and they'd leave again. And they're doing this once, twice, 3 times a week, continuing the relationship with the departed in a way that is completely absent from anything that I've experienced here in the U.S. And so these are things that I hope people hear this. They can kind of imaginatively go on our pilgrimage with us, and then maybe we can start seeing some beautiful cemeteries here in the U.S.
That's amazing. I love hearing that. And Father Andrew, I know we've got just a few minutes left, but tell us what your dreams are and what your hope is in our listeners listening to this podcast.
Yeah, one of the things I've come to believe is that pilgrimage should change you, that it should permanently change you. And it usually takes, for that change to really set in, it takes a long time to process it. And so I'm still processing this pilgrimage, even though it's now been several months since we were on it. And I think the documentary in a lot of ways is my way of processing it, or at least one way. But, one of the things that exists there, I think it's somewhere in the northwest of the country. We didn't actually get to go, but in, throughout, and this exists in a number of places in the world, actually. So there was years and years, a couple centuries ago, I think there was a Catholic bishop who set up a kind of Jerusalem map in one of the cities there, and he took measurements from Jerusalem and the Holy Land, and he superimposed it and created stops there so that people could, in a way, make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem without making the trip all the way down there. Especially most people poor can't possibly do that. And so the truth is that most people who listen to The Wolf on the Cross will never go to Lithuania, although I really hope some will go. I hope that some will be inspired and say, I want to go connect with that.
Well, maybe you could do a pilgrimage. You can lead a pilgrimage, and maybe we can advertise that, and you and Richard could be our tour guides.
Let's go, Father. Let's go.
Let's do it.
So for most people, who take a listen, they're going to, I hope, imaginatively join us in a way. And I already believe that it's working, and here's why. So, as you mentioned, I've got a whole bunch of hats that I'm wearing and lots of different kinds of content that I create, because this is what I do for a living now. And so I get email for various podcasts, and I always say that, the podcasts that Richard and I have together, Amen Sul, that we get the longest emails. The one that I have with Father Stephen DeYoung, Lord of Spirits, we get the weirdest emails. But with this, we've already been getting a lot of feedback, and we are getting the most heartfelt emails for this one. Some are from people who are also Lithuanian American like I am, but I've had multiple people that said that within the first 10 minutes that they found themselves weeping, listening to it. And that really struck me. I wasn't expecting that. Now, I have wept many times over the course of putting this stuff together. And some of the stories you're going to hear just in episode 1 are really, really remarkable stories. But we've got a lot more stories to tell, and that's the way we're ending every episode. And we have more stories to tell, because as interesting and fascinating and heartbreaking and moving, for instance, the tale of the 3 martyrs of Vilnius, which is an awesome story. And I just have to say, everybody, if you want to venerate their relics, yes, you can go there, but you can also come to our Church of St. Paul in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, because I was sent home with relics from these martyrs. But there's going to be some really amazing stories you're going to hear along the way. And one of the great tales that you're going to hear at the end is how Lithuania kept faith in Christ even through Soviet communist domination in the latter part of the 20th century and emerged into freedom. One of the priests that we interviewed, I asked him about his life, and he started out the interview by saying, in 1990, I celebrated 2 things: the independence of my beloved Lithuania, and that was the year that I became an Orthodox Christian. Oh, wow. And we were sitting there, I was like, okay, we're in the presence of historical people.
Right.
Like that's the man who, for instance, almost created Lithuanian language orthodoxy single-handedly. Single-handedly, created this parish out of nothing. So those are the stories you're going to hear. And I hope that people come away from it not just inspired, but changed. Certainly it's changed me. I got to bring my daughter along. It's changed her. Richard seems a little different. And yeah. And also, we're pouring so much into it. I think you're going to hear, and I know you've listened to it, Father. So there's a production value that is new to Ancient Faith Radio. It's
outstanding. I strongly encourage our listeners to take the moment to listen to it.
So we've got ambient music, we've got Lithuanian folk music. I mean, some amazing Lithuanian artists have offered their music to us to just use it. We've got Lithuanian liturgical music. There's a liturgical choir that did a whole recording session just for us. There's voice actors, there's sound effects. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So
tell our listeners one last time, Father Andrew, where they can find this documentary so that they can go right now and listen to it.
So you can find The Wolf and the Cross, and please subscribe, by the way, on the Ancient Faith Radio app. You can also find it on ancientfaith.com, or you can find it on pretty much every major podcasting platform. So whatever you use, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, whatever else, it's out there.
Awesome. Father Andrew Damick and Richard Rohlin, thank you so much. It's an honor to have you guys on our show, and I look forward to as this documentary continues and more episodes come out, I'd love to have you guys back on the show. I thoroughly enjoyed it, listeners, and I encourage you to do the same, to take the time today, just to set aside an hour and a half, and just simply allow this. It's extraordinary. And so, brothers, thank you so much. It was just a blessing to have you on our show. And, just in the last few moments of our show, I do want to encourage all of you to join us next Tuesday. We're going to be interviewing a man by the name of John Heyman, who wrote a brand new book called Agonizing Peace. I know that title just is so unique, Agonizing Peace, but I promise you that his story will inspire you and motivate you. And that's really what we've been trying to do with this episode, as well as next week's episode, is to really kind of take you on a journey a little bit outside of yourselves, to kind of listen to other people's story and other people's lives. And hopefully, as Father Andrew beautifully stated, to not only just inspire you, but also to change you. And so hopefully that will do so. So next Tuesday, join us at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Ancient Faith Radio. To our beloved Matushka Trudy, who produces the show every single Tuesday, and all of our great friends at Ancient Faith, thank you so much. And to all of you for taking the time to listen tonight, God bless you, and stay strong in your walk of faith.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of the book